Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are getting ready for the 2044 first year player draft. It's been a bit of a tough season for Buffalo so far, but we've been playing better in the month of June. 3 games behind in the NL East at this point, but if the season were over today, we would be in the fourth wild card position in the National League. And we're actually even a little better than that when you look at the power rankings, where we rank 8th out of 32 teams in the big leagues. So we remain hopeful we're going to make a 17th consecutive playoff appearance with the Buffalo Wings this year, despite some offensive struggles thus far this season, which resulted in our longtime leadoff hitter, Deshaun Seifu, recently being demoted to the bench against right-handed pitching at the age of 40 in what could be his final season in the majors and his final season in Buffalo, quite possibly, even if he does decide to come back next year. Find a hard time believing that he would be one of the 26 best potential players on our roster. So could have an interesting decision to make with him this offseason. Would love him to spend his whole career in Buffalo. But if he's insistent upon coming back next year and doesn't retire, it could end up being a tricky decision for us. And speaking of tricky decisions, as I mentioned, we're doing the first year player draft today, and we've simmed ahead at the end of the last episode to our 40th pick in the draft, which will be our first pick in the draft, the 40th pick in the draft. And kind of agree with the assessment of those of you who have shared thoughts. It's a pretty uninspiring class of draftees who are left here for us at number 40 overall. I am intrigued by the right fielder Dan Glazewski, 17-year-old. Like his personality, think he could be a pretty interesting corner outfielder down the line with a nice bat. But he's impossible to sign, and we don't have the money to likely sign him right now. We certainly could tweak scouting and player development if we needed to. But right now, I'm inclined to see if he drops further in the draft, since I imagine every team except us in Washington has had a shot at him at this point. I think it's conceivable, given his demands, that he ends up dropping, and maybe we can pick him up in the third or fourth round if he's still available. It will require some shifting around of our resources and possibly even trading people away to be able to potentially sign him. And because of that, we're not going to spend a first round pick on him, even though if he didn't sign with us, we'd get the pick back next year. But I think we're going to focus on pitching right now. We've traded away a handful of sound to good pitching prospects over the last couple of seasons to replenish our farm system with some bats and also just bring some talent onto the major league level. So although I think our pitching in the minors is still where we ultimately have some depth, it's a little more balanced than it has been in recent years, especially with the additions of Riker and Fuchs, two of the top prospects in our organization this past offseason. So I am honing in on 3 pitchers, and they're really the pitchers that were recommended by DLL First Base 14 and David Chesley. And those 3 pitchers are the starters, Arian Bird, Legend Bird, 18-year-old right-hander out of Pennsylvania, durable as far as his injury proneness, solid stamina, okay at holding on runners, certainly a 3-pitch arsenal that, if that changeup develops, would be a 4-pitch arsenal. And the development of that changeup is really critical to the stuff really getting to world-class levels. If that changeup doesn't develop, I think he's still a useful pitcher, but he's probably more of a 55-60 stuff with 55 movement and 55 control if he completely develops. So I think he's a good solid starter without that changeup, but that changeup's going to be necessary, in my view, for him to be a top of the rotation type starter. But certainly coming off an incredible year with a 10-0 record, almost 2 strikeouts per inning, as he's been dominating high schoolers. Caleb Creveling, another 18-year-old, also durable, similar stamina, a little better at holding runners. Like the high work ethic, don't love the low loyalty and adaptability, but the high work ethic is most important to me. He is looking at a 3 to 5 pitch arsenal, similar a bit in that his potentially top pitch is one that needs to develop, but it's a curve rather than a changeup, which I think is a higher probability development. Movement similar, think he could have excellent control. His stuff not quite as high end potentially, but still think that he's a very interesting prospect. Coincidentally, also is 10-0 on the year, also striking out almost 2 batters per inning. His ERA is a bit higher. And then last but not least is Pruski. And Pruski was the one recommended by David Chesley, DLL first base 14, preferred Bird and Creveling. Pruski, also durable, also solid stamina and solid at holding on runners. He's the strongest in both of those. Probably the best overall personality with the high work ethic and intelligence, although he's also low on leadership. He's a lefty. Only a potentially 3-pitch arsenal, so he needs that slider to develop to be a starter. But another guy with potentially plus stuff, plus movement, and really good control. He doesn't throw quite as hard as the others with that 90 to 92 mile an hour velocity, but he is a finesse pitcher, so probably a bit less reliant on blowing people away with high velocity. 9-0 this year, close to 2 strikeouts an inning and a 0.40 ERA, so pretty similar stats to all of them. Does note that Bird and Pruski are extremely hard for us to sign, whereas Creveling is easy. They all say that the demand is for the slot, but I think what I've tended to see is when it's a slot and extremely hard, sometimes they'll come in a little hot, or if it's slot and easy, sometimes they might come in a little less than slot, or I think that's the way it manifests itself. I like all 3. I don't have an incredibly strong opinion on them. And I think I'm going to go with Creveling. I like the fact that if everything goes well, he's a 5-pitch guy. Even if the changeup doesn't develop, he's a 4-pitch guy, which still is probably superior to the other 2 starting pitching prospects. And he does bring the high work ethic, throws a little higher in the mid-90s at this point. To me, there's no obvious pound the table right answer or wrong answer here. Part of it might go to Pruski being a little easier to sign, or Creveling being a little easier to sign. We'll see what our scout says. Can't hurt to get a recommendation. And he goes with the first baseman, Jared Wynand. He is definitely not on our short list. I mean, he's durable. He's got some home run pop. If he lingers a round or 2, we'd consider him. But he's really just a pure bat that doesn't bring much else at all to the table. If the scout were to recommend a pitcher, he would go with Legend Bird. So interesting that he's a little higher on him than he is on Creveling or Pruski. But we're going to stick to our knitting and stick to what we thought made sense. And we're going to go ahead and draft Creveling here first. And when we negotiate with him, he's right at slot. So I'm guessing that those other two guys who were much more difficult to sign probably would have come in a little above slot for us. But we'll meet his demand and move on to the second round. And interestingly, here in the second round, Wynand, who our scout recommended last round, as well as Glazewski, who is just going to be looking for an insane amount of money, are both still available at the late second round, where we've got our next pick. All of the higher than 3-star pitching prospects are now gone, and you can see there's only a handful of even 3-star pitching prospects, according to our scouts, still around at this point. And here in the second round, none of the starting pitchers available really intrigue us all that much. I might consider Wynand or Glazewski if they're around in the third round, but right now, got another direction that I'm thinking about going. See what our scout recommends, and he still recommends Wynand, not surprisingly. I'm guessing if we ask him to give us an outfielder recommendation, it's probably going to be Glazewski. Actually, it's not. It's Eric Plecker, who looks like a very average prospect, does have some positive personality traits. The guys that I'm more interested in are a couple of center fielders. The shortstop that we had mentioned briefly in the previous episode that I was considering and hoping might fall to us is gone now. Jabari Cumberlander went the middle of this second round to the White Sox. Don't know that I would have went for him, but he was certainly a player that I was going to consider. So right now I'm thinking about two center fielders. One is Eric Churchman. Pretty good contact hitter, durable, good speed, decent base runner, decent bunter, decent fielder. Don't love the low adaptability and work ethic, but not a horrible prospect. And then the other guy that I like is also a center fielder, if I can find him. And it's Doug Schaap. Also durable, also has pretty good speed, even though he's not as efficient on the base paths. Not as good a bunter. He does have better outfield range, high work ethic and adaptability, so a better personality. Not quite the same type of contact hitter, but he does have pretty good gap power and the speed to make it worthwhile, and kind of an average-ish eye and avoid strikeouts rating. So he's intriguing to me. I don't think he's a big-time player, but I think he's potentially a pretty useful guy who certainly, with that outfield range and that speed and this batting profile, could be a pretty good fourth or fifth outfielder. And if we get a little bit of random upside in terms of his development, he could end up being a pretty decent starter with that range and the ability to hit a decent amount, play every day, and have a little bit of speed to stretch out some balls hit into the gap into doubles and triples. So we are going to go with Doug Schaap here in the second round, and then we'll auto draft forward to the third and see if anyone interesting is still available at the top. And Glazewski is still there. And at this point, I'm going to take him. He's the highest ceiling player in the draft. There's nobody else that we're really in love with here late in the third round. Don't know that we're going to make all the moves that we need to free up the money required to sign him. But I think it's certainly worth bringing him into the organization, and if it doesn't work out, we'll get a compensatory pick for him next year. We're picking second to last in the third round this year, so compensatory pick, we actually might end up a little earlier than we're picking right now. We'll see what the scout recommends. He's recommending Jeff McFeeters. Interesting bat for a catcher, but just not much of a glove. I think we'll go with the high-end guy in Glazewski here in the third round. Don't know whether we'll end up signing him or not, but willing to roll the dice a little bit. And here in the fourth round, the catcher who was recommended last time around, Jeff McFeeters, is still there. So if our scout is logically consistent, he should still recommend him to us. But he's back to Eric Plecker, the uninteresting to me right fielder, who I guess was his second round recommendation. So the scout really, or he was our recommendation when we were looking for an outfielder, actually, not just necessarily the number one guy overall, if I remember correctly. But neither of them interests me all that much. We're getting to the point where the pickings are slim. I'm going to go with the corner infielder, Pete Rolls. He's durable, a switch hitter. Looks like he can play first or third. Would certainly prefer him defensively at first. If he fully develops, plus contact, plus home run power, could be a useful offensive player. I don't think he's a real high-end prospect, but unfortunately there's not too many of them around. There is a reliever that I like, but I think there's a chance he might be around in the fifth round. So we'll go ahead and we will see McFeeters is still out there. He could be an option at this point, even though I don't love the defense, if the reliever that I was somewhat intrigued by is gone. And I can't remember the name of that reliever at this point, so I'm going to have to do a little more research. And he actually is still available. It's Kevin Morrison. He's listed as a starting pitcher, but he's not. But he's a left-hander. Looks like if that knuckle curve develops, could have a pretty nice combination of a fastball and a knuckle curve. He's got good stamina for a reliever, high work ethic. Think his stuff and movement could both be well above average. As a fifth-round pick, he is extremely hard to sign. It says his demand is $1.3 million. We'll go ahead and draft him and see what that means. That just means he's looking for more than slot. So you can see with Morrison and Rolls, we're both at players who are a bit more than slot at this point. Our first two picks right in line with slot in terms of what they're ultimately demanding for. And then obviously Glazewski. Who knows what he's going to be looking for. And we've met the demands of our first, second, fourth, and fifth round picks. Might as well see how crazy Glazewski's demands are now. Actually, it's not as bad as I thought. He says a bonus significantly above $3.8 million to consider signing. So that's not really that bad. I think we're going to get through the draft before potentially engaging with him. But this could end up being a real good pick for us. Sometimes when they're those guys who say they're impossible to sign, 12, 13, 14, 15 million dollars is kind of what they're looking for. But a bonus significantly above 3.8 million is a number that we can certainly hit. You can see we've got budget room of almost 6.8 million at this point, even with the offers we've made outstanding. If we're not too aggressive with the players we pick over these next 15 rounds of the draft, we should be able to maybe get him signed and still have a little bit of money available to use on perhaps someone we'll be trading for in the coming weeks without really cutting back on scouting and player development at all. So turns out that roll of the dice on Glazewski in the third round might end up working out for us pretty well. But we'll get through the rest of the draft before making any decisions there. If I come across anyone interesting in the next 15 rounds, I'll let you know. And we did end up taking a few guys looking for more than slot in the middle rounds of the draft, most notably Jeff McFeeters, who he had been recommended to us a couple times by our scout when he was still around in the 7th round. Even though we don't love his defense, felt he was reasonable value to roll the dice on at that point. And see a very high contingent of high schoolers this year among the players who are looking for bonuses from us. So before we worry about McFeeters, Ernesto Pinel, a center fielder, good personality, looks like a potentially interesting-ish bat. He's durable. And Ian Hamilton, decent defensive shortstop prospect, also with good work ethic. Kind of wonder what his bat's going to become. We're going to try to get Glazewski signed and know one way or another as we get closer to the trade deadline, whether we're going to have him on the team or not. As I mentioned, he was looking to bonus significantly above $3.8 million. And he also says that even though we only drafted him moments ago, his patience is running low, and this is probably our last shot at signing him. So we're going to offer him $4.6 million. It's about a little over 20% more than what he's looking for. Hopefully that will get things done. We'll find out, and then depending on the amount of money we end up spending on him, sounds like it'll either be $4.6 million or he'll be back in the draft. That'll determine how aggressively we might go after McFeeters, Pinel, and or Ian Hamilton. And some good news, Glazewski signed. So given that he was impossible to sign and he was a 5-star prospect that dropped to the 3rd round of the draft, the fact we were able to lock him up for $4.6 million signing bonus, I think could be a very good move for us. We also got our 4th and 5th round picks, Rolls and Morrison, signed as well. Still waiting to hear on the 1st and 2nd rounders. No reason to expect that we won't have Creveling or Schaap on board eventually, but feeling pretty good at this point about the way the draft turned out. But it's always easy to feel good the day after the draft. We'll know 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now whether we really should have felt good today or not. And we made it to July 1st. The team has been playing some incredible baseball over this last week or so of June. I mean, pretty much the whole month of June was outstanding. But you can see we've won 7 games in a row at this point, and we've won 8 out of 9 since the draft took place. So the team is on top of the NL East. It's really happened real quickly with the great month of June that we had. We're half a game up on the Mets at this point, and we've got the best record in the National League. So 7 wins in a row certainly helped us get there. Taking a look at the leaderboard here, our ace, who could be in his final year with us, Alexis Barajas, 2nd in the league in ERA, leading the league in wins. And Joe Scott is leading the league in saves and still somewhat oddly tied for 2nd in pitcher WAR, as Scott is having an excellent year for us out of the bullpen. Once we get to the true midway point of the season in a few days, we'll do a deep dive when we have a little more information on how everybody is performing. But the team has really turned things around here over the last month or so. Don't know if it's entirely because we took Deshaun Seifu out of the starting lineup, or if we've just started normalizing our production. But a 20-6 record in the month of June has us back in first place. Still a pretty mediocre offense, 12th in the National League in runs scored. But the pitching staff, as it often has been, is dominant, 1st in the National League in runs allowed. And you can see we are leading the National League in the majority of pitching categories. And we've also put up some excellent defensive metrics thus far in 2044, ranking second in defensive efficiency and first in zone rating. But before we get to the midpoint of the season and do our annual review of how things are going and start preparing for the trade deadline, as it is July 1st, probably time to check in and likely promote some of the key prospects in our system that we've been following. Two of them are at Marathon. One is Juan Toledo, international free agent signing from 2039. He's almost 22 years old now. He had lingered in rookie ball and was incredibly unproductive there for many seasons. Strikeouts are still a big potential issue with him, but you can see he's kind of got major league home run power at this point, and we think it can get much better. And he's finally putting things together in Class A ball this year, hitting .298 with 18 homers and 52 ribbies and 248 at-bats. At this point, he's a monster in terms of his ratings for A ball. So we're going to promote him up to the South Atlantic League, where his home run power and his gap power are still going to be excellent, but his contact and his eye a little more appropriate. And he'll be being joined there by Josh Fuchs. Fuchs, who we picked up in that big trade with the Yankees. You can see he's capable of handling Sally League pitching at this point. Hitting .272, also his 18 home runs in just 232 at-bats at Class A Marathon. So both of these guys in their around 21, 22 years old, ready for the promotion to Jamestown, and it's certainly conceivable that both of those players could be up in Utica before the end of the season. And for those who have been watching, of course, the gem of our organization is in Double-A Utica, and that's Jim Reichert, who we picked up in a trade last year, now considered the number 6 prospect in baseball. Trade last offseason, technically. It was actually this calendar year. We kept Reichert in Double-A, even though he had experience in Triple-A last year and was kind of too good for the level simply because excellent relationship with our coaching staff there, specifically our hitting coach. You can see he's got dominant ratings for the Eastern League, and he's looking like he's going to be pretty dominant in AAA as well. But we did make some progress with him. Look at his scouting report between now and the beginning of the season, and he has picked up another 5 points in contact and another 5 points in his power while he's been down in Double-A. So from that perspective, I think it was useful to get the hopeful good coaching there. Absolutely crazy numbers: 316 average, 31 homers, 71 ribbies in 269 at-bats, with a ridiculous 201 OPS plus and 197 WRC plus. So Reichert clearly heading up to AAA at this point, and given the struggles we have had with our offense, I think it's logical to assume that come September he will be getting a call-up, and he will likely be in the lineup every day for us at the major league level, hopefully give our offense a little bit of the boost in the pennant race, and then hopefully a long run through the playoffs. And we've got some more pruning to do on these teams, particularly our rookie league team with the influx of most of our draftees going to need to make some tough decisions, maybe cut some people out of the organization entirely, promote a few more to Class A, and start getting some of those rosters to a little bit more manageable sizes in the minors than they are today. The other thing we're going to do with Reichert, and this is something that talked about in comments with Patrick DeBonis a couple episodes ago, but we're going to play him at first base in AAA. He's fully developed in right field. He hasn't really progressed too much in left field this year. I don't think he's going to be a particularly good defensive first baseman with that 35 range, 30 error rating, but he is 6'2". I think he can be a guy that we can at least put there in a pinch. So we'll try to get him trained up at first base over the next couple of months in AAA before he likely will be making his major league debut in September. And we've made it to the 4th of July, which also happens to be the midway point of the season. Have not been playing as well in these early days of July. And unfortunately for us, they've been against the team that was half a game behind us. So the Mets swept us in a 3-game series. So we went from being half a game up in the division to 2.5 games behind the Mets at this point. That said, given where we were a month ago, still feeling pretty good about how the season has gone. We're now in the number 1 spot in the wild card race, 4 games clear of the final wild card spot. I'm guessing that even though those 3 games against the Mets weren't great, probably not any huge shifts in our standings. And you can see we are still first in the National League in runs allowed, 12th in the National League in runs scored. I guess I was talking about statistics rather than standings. In the standings, 46-35 record, 1 below Pythagorean expectations. Mediocre April and May, and incredible June. And thus far, as we talked about, July has not been great, but it's only 3 games into the month. And doing a deep dive on our pitching at this point, not surprisingly, overall it looks pretty solid. Jim Lance, only a 5-5 record, but a 3.03 ERA over 92 innings, a 2.2 WAR, a WHIP below 1 for the 26-year-old who led the National League in WHIP a year ago. Happy with the performance he's put up as our new number 1 starter this year, even though it hasn't necessarily shown up in the 1-loss record thus far. Our former number 1 starter for the past decade, Alexis Barajas, has done really well in the 1-loss mark with a 10-1 record, 2.34 ERA, just an outstanding season for the likely soon-to-be free agent. I think he'll probably opt out of that $20 million contract that he has with us next year. Says he's looking for $22.7 million a year for 6 years. Going to be interesting decision with him still playing really well. We will have a little bit of money to spend potentially, but do we want to do that on a player in his mid to late 30s? Eric Barbarito has kind of been the unlucky guy, a 1-5 record, pretty hard to go 1 win in 16 starts on a team that's got a .567 winning percentage, but that is where we find ourselves with Barbarito. 99 strikeouts in 84 1/3 innings and a 2.64 SIERA. The BABIP 326, so he's probably got a little bit unlucky thus far this year. Chris Lott, the youngster, 3-6 in his second full year as a major league starter. 3.99 ERA, 3.22 SIERA, a 1.8 WAR. He's also doing fine. And then Simeon Manelli, the number 5 starter, 4-5 with a 4.28 ERA. Similarly, his SIERA of 3.49, better than he's actually performed on the field this year. So we've also gotten over 80 innings from each of those starters, so they're all on pace to qualify for the ERA title, although Barajas and Lance are the 2 who look like they could actually be in competition for it. But pretty pleased with the starting that we've gotten, and as we talked about, Joe Scott's had a real nice year out of the bullpen, although his WAR has actually dipped a bit over the past few games. So seems like he probably blew a save or 2 against the Mets, I'm guessing. 4-5 record on the year with 25 saves, 11.3 strikeouts per 9 innings, 3.09 ERA, 2.53 SIERA. Glad to have Scott on board as our closer again. Floyd Auclair having an outstanding year as our stopper was good advice last off season to be maybe a little more judicious in how we used him, benching him when he's a little more tired. 7-1 with 106 strikeouts over 73 innings, 185 ERA, and a 1.97 SIERA with a 2.4 WAR. He's been great. Chris Powers has the highest ERA of any of our relievers at 4.62, 333 BABIP against him, 371 SIERA. Looking at his ratings, no reason that we would be moving on from him anytime soon. Nate Ruckel, our longtime stopper, is now in a setup role where he's done well. 262 ERA over 34 and a third innings pitched. One of only two lefties we have on the pitching staff. Luis Palencia coming back from some injuries. 3-2 record with a couple of saves. Solid year for him out of the bullpen as well. He would be our fifth starter if we have any injuries or if someone's ineffective enough that we want to make a move to move them out of the rotation, but we're nowhere near that point right now. Juan Castaneda, who we picked up this past off season, 1-1 with a 3.16 ERA, striking out just about a batter per inning for us. Mike Roberts, who's come up through our system, finally getting an opportunity this year. Only pitched in 10 games, 18 innings pitched with a 3 ERA. He's been the guy who's been used the least frequently in the bullpen, and he's basically been a replacement level pitcher. Joe Warner is a lefty, has gotten some extra work, even though he's also the long reliever. 174 ERA over 41 and a third innings pitched, and you can see he's going about close to 2.5 innings each time he goes out there. So he's done a solid job for us as well. Certainly wouldn't mind adding a real high-end left-handed arm in the bullpen, but don't see any glaring holes when we look at this pitching performance overall. It's the best pitching staff in the league, as we talked about, and 4.62 is the highest ERA among 13 pitchers on the pitching staff. You're probably in a pretty good spot when that's the case. And the everyday players are where we've had some disappointment this year and some underperformance, and where I think it's more likely that we may find some areas that we'll want to focus on in the trade market over these next 4 weeks before we get to the trade deadline. Chris Malone, who we brought on in a trade this offseason, has been solid as a backup catcher, hitting .279 and 68 at-bats. 97 WRC plus. He's solid defensively. Can't ask for much more than that for a backup catcher. Juan Ramirez, our starter, has not been particularly good offensively, hitting just .205. Does have 13 doubles in 219 at-bats, only 3 home runs and 21 ribbies, though. Adds up to a 77 WRC plus and a 1.3 WAR, driven by his excellent defense. Pretty content with that crew, although we would hope that we'd get a little more offense out of Ramirez. He has walked 34 times, so his on-base percentage is more than 100 points above his batting average. So it hasn't been an awful offensive year, but certainly would love a little bit more from him. Daniel Rojas, the first baseman in what's likely his final go-round with us. He's going to be turning 38 in less than 2 months. Having the best season he's had in his 4 years with us. Hitting .282, 16 homers, 43 ribbies. Adds up to a 162 WRC plus and a 3 WAR. Certainly not thinking we need to make any improvements there at first base. We talked about Deshaun Seifu at the end of our last episode. He's been demoted. He's no longer our leadoff hitter against right-handed pitching. He's playing just a couple days a week when we face left-handed pitching. At the age of 40, he really hasn't been good this year. .205 batting average, 46 hits and 224 at-bats. His on-base percentage is below 300. Adds up to a 56 WRC plus and a WAR that's almost a win below replacement level, given his lack of anything defensively. He's still our captain, and he's still very effective on the base paths, 17 for 20 stealing bases. But it seems likely that Seifu's career is winding down. Alejandro Contreras has been our utility infielder this year, hitting .235 with 3 homers and 51 at-bats. The little pop that he's had means he's got a 110 WRC plus. He kind of is what he is at this point. He's 28 years old. I don't think he's going to improve much in terms of his contact and home run power, but he's a guy who's versatile, can play a lot of positions in the infield. If we have any injuries at second, third, or short, he could get some more significant playing time going forward. Danny Ferguson, the young second baseman, hitting just .233 and only 4 home runs and 279 at-bats. So not getting the same type of pop we got from him when he came up at the end of last season. 84 WRC plus, 0.7 WAR. He may ultimately end up being more of a utility infielder, but for the time being, until Fuchs is on board, he's our starting second baseman. He also is not even 24 years old yet, and we think his contact can get a little better. So still think that he is a guy who will likely be a starter for us for the next few seasons. Ramiro Medina, the third baseman, hitting .247, but does have 16 homers for us, 115 WRC plus, also 13 out of 15 on the base paths. He's definitely stabilized third base for us over the last couple of years when Seifu's moved to that DH role. A pretty well-rounded player who can do a little bit of everything, can run a little bit, can field a little bit, can hit some home runs. Happy to have him on board. And last, but hopefully not least, Mike Whitehead, who's playing short for us this year, hitting .261, not a lot of pop in the bat, 78 WRC plus, and barely above replacement level. Guessing his fielding is probably a little below average for a shortstop. Yeah, you can see his zone rating and his defensive efficiency both a little below average. In a perfect world, we'd like a better glove at shortstop. Honestly, with the 60 range and 60 error rating that he has right now, I guess he's still probably our best guy there. Maybe Ferguson with the better arm could take over. No perfect answers at shortstop defensively with Andrews gone and with Fuchs still probably about a year away from being ready for the majors. So if we could add a big-time shortstop with a big bat and a great glove, that would be a clear area of need as we get closer to the trade deadline. Now, we don't have a ton of money to potentially add that type of player at this point, but we can always get creative. Turning to our outfielders, the left fielder Tim Boston, pretty productive in his first year with us. Not incredible, but hitting .265, 11 doubles, 11 homers, 48 ribbies. Adds up to a 110 WRC plus, so certainly not as good as he's been in parts of the previous 2 seasons when he came up in Boston and put up 143 and 151 WRC pluses, but still looks like a good, solid left-handed bat who is pretty tough on right-handed pitching. Think he should be an important part of our team for years to come. Luis Comadran is the guy who's been a big problem for us. Signed him to an extension this offseason, 4 years, over $72 million. Felt like he was a guy who had been very productive for us. with 108, 135, 140, and 127 WRC pluses over the course of his 3.5 years in Buffalo. And he has just forgotten how to hit since he signed that big contract. Batting average just 221, slugging percentage below 300, and only 3 home runs and 249 at-bats. You look at those ratings, particularly those ratings against right-handed pitching, and it feels like he should be much better in the second half of the year. Don't know if there's something going on that we can't see in the ratings, but I would expect more production out of him going forward. Josh Porter could be his final year with us, and he's back into more of a utility outfielder role. Is hitting .328 with 3 homers and 14 ribbies and just 67 at-bats. He's starting against left-handed pitching, but we're not facing a lot of that. But that 175 WRC plus has been very productive in very limited playing time. I think his demands, even though he's not playing much, are still going to be pretty high. $16 million a year, so it's maybe something to think about. It's going to be a little tough. He's going to be 31, and we do have Reichert looming. So it might be time to move on from Josh Porter, but we could also try to find a way to hopefully get him a few more at-bats over the second half of the year. Maybe layer him in the outfield with some of the switch hitters and left-handers on occasion against right-handed pitching just to get him some more at-bats because he's been having a good year. Ishmael Velasco, the center fielder, kind of having a Ishmael Velasco season. 277 average, 17 doubles, 4 triples, 9 homers, 14 out of 15 on the base paths. Adds up to a 116 WRC plus for our center fielder. And then Edgar Canales, who's gotten some more playing time since we took Seifu out of the starting lineup, hitting .211, no home runs and 199 at-bats, just a 54 WRC plus. So he's been somewhat disappointing this year, even though he's getting more playing time than he did last season. He is, as I mentioned, the one who moved into the lineup. We moved him to right field and pushed Boston to DH when we took Seifu out of the lineup, but is a left-handed bat. Canales expected that he'd be doing a little bit against right-handed pitching. He had been in the lineup against left-handers, which wasn't an optimal matchup for him, but we were kind of short a right-handed hitting outfielder at the time. So outside of Coma Duran, who we think will bounce back, there's not, in my mind, anyone who's totally underperforming, but the offense overall has certainly been disappointing, and we'll need to spend some time trolling the trade market in the coming weeks to see if maybe there's someone who can help us. Looking at the batters who are available, Ignacio Mendoza, right-handed hitting left fielder, definitely has some pop. Pretty much a league average offensive player this season for the Diamondbacks, though. Ignacio Ayala, first baseman. He's put up a 142 WRC plus this year. The 30-year-old is in the final year of his contract. Don't know that first base / DH is really a big need of ours. Definitely a few guys with a little pop in their bats. Jeremy White, first baseman, also has a good eye. 109 WRC plus. He's wrecked physically, even though he's only 30 years old. Right now it doesn't look like there's necessarily a huge difference-making bat out there. But we've got 4 weeks until the All-Star break, so there's certainly time for us to think about things. Taking a look at the top pitchers who are available. Unfortunately, you don't see a lot of lefties near the top of the list. Jaquan Albin is injured, elbow inflammation. Juan Almonte, guy who doesn't have the greatest control in the world, 35 years old, is a guy who could certainly start or relieve with that profile, making some pretty good money in the final year of his contract with Nashville, although he's arbitration eligible, even though he's going to be 36 years old. Looks like it took him a long time to make it to the major leagues. Few other lefties, Jeff Coleman, Pat Encalade. Won't bore you with all the details on these guys. You know, Encalade listed as a starting pitcher. Like that he's an Iron Man. He's a little better against left-handed batters than he is against right-handed batters. He's pretty angry about a lot of things right now with the Angels. Looks like he could certainly use a change of scenery with a 3-9 record and a 6.30 ERA. So there's a lot of things for us to think about, but at least with the fact that we have been playing a lot better in the month of June until these first 3 games of July, we don't have to be desperate when we are potentially thinking about what we should do on the trade market. As I mentioned, if there was a great shortstop out there, that would be something to think about. If there was a huge right-handed bat, that would be something to think about. Doesn't seem like there's any obvious solutions on the trade block, but we can always get creative, and we do also, as I mentioned, have some potential help coming in the minors, most notably Riker. So feeling pretty good about where we sit here midway through the season, on pace for over 90 wins and on pace for a 17th consecutive playoff berth. And we'll find out over our next few episodes whether either or both of those things actually happen. Next time around, though, we'll dig in to find out who made the All-Star team from the Buffalo Wings, and also figure out exactly what we're going to end up doing, if anything, at the trade deadline this year. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.